So our next speaker is Simon Hodgson. If Simon struggles with the clicker, as Tim did, then I think they can. This is the second clicker, by the way. For those of you who are down the web stream, second clicker we've tried. So there must be a problem with your thumbs. So if you could just make sure your thumb is nicely and tightly screwed on before you attempt to use the clicker, and we will persevere with it. But Simon is the Chief Executive of Forest Enterprise England. He's held a variety of roles from corporate affairs, development, planning, and he's here to talk to us today about building a new public-private social organisation. And at this time of the day, that's not easy to say in one fell swoop. So welcome to the stage, please, Simon.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you, and good afternoon on the web stream as well. I'll attempt to look in the right direction for that, for those looking at home. What I want to talk about this afternoon is about the project that we're on with the Forestry Commission, which is to set up a new organisation following the forestry row of 2 or 3 years ago. The opportunity to do that is absolutely tremendous, because we can take benefit of all the learning that many of you have gone through. We can use best practice, we can apply our own experience to setting up this new organisation. But what I want to do is to take you through some of what we're doing, some of what we're thinking about. We're not yet fully formed, we still have legislation to go, but there is a tremendous opportunity, not only for us who are working on the project, but for society as well, and a chance, I think, to embed some of the thinking that some of you are already applying in your own organisations, and it's been really interesting to see the presentations so far. So I'll risk the first slide. Just as I continue, just leave you to warm those things up, just to remind you a little bit about the resource that we're talking about, which is a very significant resource, the largest landholding, I think, pretty much. National Trust are coming up on the rails, but I think we're still just ahead of them, but a huge and varied resource with tremendous opportunities. It's not just forestry, it's an awful lot of other things as well. But I won't run through those. You can see that we're not just talking about a commercial forestry resource, we're talking about a huge land resource with tremendous potential. Unlike this clicker. There we go. So what are we doing and why are we doing it? You remember there was a large row in 2010 about the sale of public forests, a great uprising, a reversal of policy, and a long contemplation with a panel led by the bishop and lots of worthy grandees who contemplated on the issue and came up with an important report. But what was the characteristic about the row? The characteristic was that it was a very much a grassroots reaction. People felt that these forests, which had been acquired by the Forestry Commission, weren't governments, they were their forests, and they wanted a different future for those forests. And I think the nature of the row was very interesting. It was learning for us in the Forestry Commission, but also for government, that social media and attitudes had changed in a really important and significant way. The panel, chaired by the bishop, reviewed things for a year, went round the country, looked at things, listened to hundreds of different organisations, came up with a series of recommendations. I won't go through those, but basically said it's time to move the public forest estate on. It needs to become a proper triple bottom line organisation, one that plays its part across environment, social and economic factors. It's a lot of things that we do that, but the way in which our legislation is described does not make that the organisation that the Forestry Commission is. And so after all that discussion, what has arisen is an opportunity to create a new body which takes that resource on and develops it into a new organisation, which really is going to offer a bottom line improvement on what we do on a triple bottom line. And it's a challenge, because we're trying to take an organisation which has been around for nearly 100 years, who had a very particular mission to reverse the 1,000-year decline of woodland in the UK and do something about it. A very clear mission driven by a national need, but one which over that 100 years has changed the nature of what we've done. What we've taken is land and planted it. What we've generated is forests. What society is now looking for is more value from those forests. So that has been the problem. That has been our response, but life moves on, and so we need to move on as well. There we go. There are new challenges, of course. I won't explain all those diagrams. You can work them out for yourself. You've possibly seen versions of those before, but climate change is not only a huge challenge to society at large, but a very significant challenge for forestry and the type of forestry, and we need an organisation which is able to adapt and cope with significant natural challenges like that, man-made natural challenges, but also to one that is going to offer more value to society. So we are dealing with not just society's needs for nice forests to work in, but in managing and creating an important resource for the future, for the very long term. As evidence, I think we've all got a version of this slide which just shows how many different things that we do, but the organisation has already become, even with its current remit, which is largely forestry based, a very broad-based organisation offering a lot of value to society in terms of recreation and leisure and employment, as well as forestry and the natural environment. So we're already managing a complex resource. What we don't have is the remit to turn that into an organisation that's really got triple bottom line value. And if the message that we got from the public was about they want more from their forests, that was the mission we had, currently have at the moment and had for about 20 years. This is where we're moving the organisation to, and we're now in the process of will go through in this Parliament, but may not. That's a ministerial and political decision, because we need new legislation to create the body that will embed that triple bottom line approach. And for the time being, this is the working mission that we're on, one that embeds that triple bottom line requirement into the organisation, not just an organisation that's there to improve forests and grow more forests, but actually deliver better benefits for society at the same time. This is where we are working to now. So what's the new organisation? What are the characteristics? That triple bottom line approach right up there. The body should be publicly owned, operationally independent of government. One of the characteristics of the debate is people said, government, this isn't your forest to sell off, it's our forest. So we had to try to create now a body that has the sense that people could be engaged with it. It's going to be much more transparent, accountable to people at lots of different levels. It's going to be operationally independent of government. But we could only create a publicly accountable body by it being a public really work for us. But government is committed to creating this operationally independent body that will deliver its mission much more. Embed that in the organisation. There will be a charter so that there is a way of the public, of all our stakeholders, holding us to account in a much more visible and transparent way. And these are features which will appear in the new legislation, all being well. It'll have to be based on all the good research and be evidence-based. This is not an organisation that's going to be driven by emotion. It's going to be one that's driven by science and what's important for our forests and the natural land. We're going to have new commercial freedom so that the body can create not only economic value, but also build and operate in society in a different way, commercially operate different, move out of a public funding model. And it's going to be a real release, I think, of potential and enterprise in the organisation and for all the commercial partners that we operate with. I think too quick there. That was just about buying and selling land. So the commitment government is given is that the estate will not be sold off. What we want is the potential to expand and develop the organisation. We're committed to developing a natural accounting, payment for ecosystem services models, really a core part of how we're developing the new organisation. And it's been really interesting to listen to the presentations so far on the social value side, because that is something we've got to work a lot harder. We don't have a lot of experience in that, but even from the two presentations today, I've picked up an awful lot of areas that we can work on as well. A key concept and key issue that came out of the row was the sense that whereas before we had tended to look towards national organisations, lobbying groups, bodies that had influence at the national level, what came out of the row was the the sense that it was local communities that really wanted the forest protected. They wanted their resource, their forest, to work for them better than it did, and wanted to be much more engaged in its governance, in its management, in what happened there. That was no problem for us, but that is not written into the way that we operate at the moment, is not driven into the way the organisation works. So a key design concept for us. And I think, not unsurprisingly, as that public body, as we have learnt a lot over the 100 years of our existence, we wish to remain as an exemplar of sustainable forest and land management. And I'm sure we share that aspiration with people like the Crown Estate as well. We want to be at the highest point of careful, sustainable land management, but all that means in terms of adding value. I think we might get there. In designing the legislation, in writing the legal instruction for a parliamentary council to prepare the bill, one of the issues that they're wrestling with mightily is how we have written into the legislation the need to balance the three objectives across the organisation. They obviously look at their new organisation, they look at the potential for legal challenge, for judicial review, and given that we have 285 different activities that happen on the public estate, many of them not necessarily complementary to each other, not necessarily everybody agrees with everything we do, the potential for this new organisation to get into conflict in terms of what it's trying to achieve on the ground is quite significant. So we're having a lot of discussion, a lot of really interesting discussion with lawyers about how they describe the importance of creating a balancing objective between those things. How do we balance the three pillars of sustainability in the new organisation? I'll just flick these up quickly because I don't need to explain them too much. But in designing a new organisation, and this is designing the organisation from the ground up, we're having to look at both how it will run, how it will be governed, how we take account of that local interest, how we build in real local accountability. How does the legislation work? Forestry legislation has worked by and large for 100 years. It's been changed once or twice, but it's pretty much been around for 100 years. We're trying to do the same thing again. Forestry is a long-term business. Treasury and government have said you've got to make this work financially. We've got to have a sufficiently commercial model that's going to work, as well as delivering on the triple bottom line. We've got to ensure that we have the right kind of people to run an innovative new organisation. And we've got to keep the public engaged. We've got to retain a huge stakeholder community of support. It's amazing how many different organisations and interests we have to deal with in managing this huge resource we have at the moment. Government has said we're not going to do this legislation unless you can keep those stakeholders happy. It's quite a big challenge. So there's a huge communication challenge for us. I'll just click these up as well to keep things moving. The sort of objectives and how we're trying to explain to work out ourselves and with lawyers what we're here to do. We're trying to encourage access. We're trying to encourage recreation. We're trying to engage with communities. We have a huge cultural heritage. We have, as I said at the beginning on this first slide, a huge amount of protected landscapes, hugely important natural capital sites, national parks. There's a great complexity of things that we have to take into account. All of these having to be conveyed to stakeholders as being important things we're going to protect, conveyed to our business partners as being important elements of how they take account of their business and social responsibilities with the estate, and for us, important messaging about how we run the business, how we plan the business to be successful in the long term. And we'll eventually get there. Treasury have said you've got to build a sustainable business model. This is something which they want to move and migrate away from public funding in the long term. I have no problem with that. We need a long-term plan to achieve that. It is achievable, but it's going to be it's not going to be achieved just because I say it. It's going to be achieved because we plan and government invests in it and we take a long and careful view for it. But when you're looking after forests and landscapes that are have got 600, 700-year-old trees in them, you're thinking about the very long term, and it's very important that in the very short political cycles in which we operate, that we do get that message well understood as we design the new organisation. We have most of our income comes from trading. We have 600, 700 different businesses working with us on the estate. So at creating the right business environment for those businesses to thrive, whether they be leisure recreation businesses or timber businesses or people who offer services, research, whatever it is. There's a whole range of things. We have to be also a good business partner as well and think how those businesses are going to thrive and survive on the estate as well. Just a few facts for you. We hope that we'll be in the Queen's speech in May this year, but it may take longer than that. So it's possible that we may have to wait for another Parliament to get our legislation through. But I think all environment legislation tends to be quite controversial, so I'm sure that there'll be a careful political judgment as to whether or not government feels able to risk the difficulties that environmental legislation tends to raise. We hope they will, but I think it's better that this is a job done well than a job rushed. So if it hasn't happened in this Parliament, we're pretty sure that careful preparation will enable it to come through at a later stage. And if I can just click on to the end. So I'll just flick up a few slides just to remind you of what it is, the resource there, and just leave it a few concluding points. A tremendous opportunity for us working with our partners to get a new organisation right for the future. Tremendous public interest. This is being done in full public gaze. There's no part of the process that we're involved in that we can do out of sight. It is a very public process. We surfaced in the row, we surfaced a huge range of interests, a huge level of concern, but a huge range of people who rely on this organisation, our organisation, to give them a living, to give them the opportunities for recreation, leisure, all sorts of other things. So there's a huge responsibility to get this right. A huge responsibility on government, having opened up the box, so to speak, about forestry. It wants to settle this issue down for the long term. That is the commitment. But it's it's a difficult issue. It's a very large resource. There's a lot of pressures. There's a lot of interest. There's a lot of politics around things. There's a lot of local concern. It got to a very fevered debate. So there's a lot of risk attached to getting this right as well. And finally, we really want to get it right for society, to get it as an organisation that not only has the right mission and has the right legislation, but has the right body position, gives society back value in the social, economic, and social arenas. And that's why I think learning from what others are doing is going to be hugely important for the future. So just a few pictures to finish off with. Fabulous areas that we look after, like whole of the New Forest, all of Thetford Forest, some of our big areas, but also small local woodlands, so areas of national iconic areas, but also woodlands that people walk in locally, and a lot of areas that are just valued by local communities as well as these national features. And a resource which is increasingly being used for a whole wide range of purposes. Is not just the one at the top, it's all the other issues as well. And our mission, I think, for the long term is improving the balance, getting the balance right. Thank you all very much, and thank you all on the web stream as well.